Welcome to the seminar on the Louisiana Code of Governmental Ethics for Lobbyists.
Today's program provides basic training on the Lobbyist Disclosure Acts, as well as the operative provisions in the Louisiana Code of Governmental Ethics that apply to lobbyists and those public servants with whom they interact. The following presentation goes over the laws and the definitions in the acts, as well as specific statutes in the Ethics Code. There are 3 Lobbyist Disclosure Acts in Louisiana: the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act and the Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act, and lastly, the Local Government Lobbyist Disclosure Act. Today we will discuss the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act found in Title 24 of the Revised Statutes and the Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act found in Title 49 of Louisiana's Revised Statutes. Both sets of laws have a similar purpose, that is, to maintain the integrity of the legislative process and the executive branch processes in state government. Further, these laws disclose to the public the identity of persons who are attempting to influence either the legislative process or executive branch actions. Finally, these laws track the expenditures that are made on these persons. The following definitions are important when discussing terms that are used in the Lobbyist Disclosure Acts. The first definition that we're going to look at is what is meant to lobby as provided in the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act. This definition is split into 3 parts. It can mean any one of the following actions that aid in influencing the passage or defeat of legislation. First, any direct act or communication with a legislator. Second, any preparation or research which is specifically intended at the time the research is performed to be used to support any ongoing or planned direct act or communication with a legislator. And third, conducting or attending a meeting, the purpose of which is to discuss communication with a legislator. For example, someone who calls up his legislator and attempts to influence legislator's actions through verbal communication has just lobbied the legislator. Someone who prepares research that, at the time it was prepared, knows it is going to be used in communication with the legislator has lobbied as the term is defined. Also, someone who attends a meeting which is designed to influence a legislator has also lobbied. However, just because one is engaged in lobbying does not necessarily make a person a lobbyist, as defined in the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act. So the next definition we will cover is what constitutes a lobbyist in the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act. If a person is employed or engaged for compensation to act in a representative capacity to lobby, and lobbying is one of his principal duties, that person is defined in the statute as a lobbyist. Note that there is a second part to the definition, a second way that a person can be classified as a lobbyist. A lobbyist is also any person who simply acts in a representative capacity and makes an expenditure. However, the term lobbyist, in accordance with the statute, shall not mean a person who does not make a direct act or have any direct communication with a legislator for the purpose of influencing the passage or defeat of legislation. This exclusion indicates that while someone may be lobbying as part of his principal duties, if he never makes a verbal or direct act or communication with any legislator, then he does not have to register as a lobbyist. How can this happen? Well, if somebody is employed and his principal job duties consist of preparing research, then that person is defined by the statute as a lobbyist. The exclusion comes into play in that while an individual may be defined as a lobbyist in the law because one of his principal duties are defined as lobbying, if he does not make any direct act or communication with a legislator, he does not have to register as a lobbyist. Now, if that person were to make an expenditure at any time on the legislator, he would have to register and disclose the expenditures that were made. How do you know if lobbying is one of your principal duties? The statute defines a principal duty as any duty which is expected to account for 20% or more of a person's time in fulfilling the terms of his or her engagement or employment. The next definition that we have for you is that of expenditure. This definition is used both in the Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act as well as the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act. An expenditure is the gift or payment of money or anything of economic value for the purchase of food, drink, or refreshments for a legislator, legislative staff, or an executive branch official for the purpose of lobbying, when the lobbyist or lobbyist principal would account for the expenditure as an ordinary and necessary expense which is related to the lobbyist or principal's business. If an expenditure is made on a legislator, legislative staff, or an executive branch official, that means that someone has just purchased food or drink for them. There is no dollar amount trigger in the definition of expenditure, so any gift or payment for food or drink, whether it is for the purchase of a sandwich, a cup of coffee, a gumball, or a steak, is considered an expenditure. It is important to note that expenditures that are made on the spouses or minor children of legislators or executive branch officials are also reportable in Louisiana. An expenditure providing for complimentary admission to a civic, nonprofit, educational, or political event is acceptable when the public servant is a program honoree, given a speech at an event, a participant in a panel discussion at the event, or if they are attending the event to assist an elected official. Individuals who are assisting an elected official at an event must be under the supervision of that elected official, and the assistance provided must be part of their ordinary employment duties. Lobbyists must disclose complimentary admission for the following fundraising events: 1. For a candidate or political party. 2. An event held by or for the benefit of an educational institution. Or 3. An event held by or for the benefit of a nonprofit organization which conducts educational programs. Finally, the definition of expenditure includes travel provided to a legislator in connection with the legislator making a public speech. That term, public speech, is defined as a speech or other oral presentation, including a panel discussion or radio or TV appearance before the public at large or before any civic, political, religious, educational, or charitable group or organization by a member of the legislature in his capacity as a legislator. Now, let's look at what lobbying means in the Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act. You'll note that it is a simple definition. It is not a threefold definition as the term lobbying is in the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act. In this case, lobbying is defined as any direct act or communication with an executive branch official, the purpose of which is to aid or influence an executive branch action. We'll define executive branch action in the coming slides. We'll also define who is considered an executive branch official. But very simply, any verbal communication, direct act, or email with an executive branch official in which you intend to influence an executive branch action is defined as lobbying in terms of the Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act. An executive branch action is any act by an executive branch agency or official to effectuate the public powers, function, and duties of an executive branch official or an executive branch agency. The use of the word duties is key in this section because it is extremely broad. Executive branch action is any job duty of an executive branch official. When we go over the definition of executive branch official, we will note that there are a large number of individuals who either work for a state agency or serve on a state board or commission or who are statewide elected officials. The employees of those agencies, and there are a lot of them in Louisiana, are all executive branch officials. If an individual makes a direct act or communication in an attempt to influence the job duties of one of these employees, then that person has attempted to influence an executive branch action and therefore, by definition, has engaged in lobbying. An exception to the definition of executive branch action is for the actions of state doctors who are administering treatment or prescribing medication to their patients. However, the actions of the Medicaid Pharmaceutical and Therapeutics Committee are executive branch actions. Therefore, if a pharmaceutical representative attempts to influence the actions of individuals who serve on the Medicaid Pharmaceutical and Therapeutics Committee, that is an executive branch action. As we briefly discussed, an executive branch official is an elected or appointed official or any employee of an executive branch action. Executive branch agencies are the state and any state office, department, board, commission, institution, or quasi-public entity which is created in the executive branch of state government by the Constitution or by law. You may view a list of the executive branch agencies on the Board of Ethics website. In addition, when individuals register as lobbyists and file expenditure reports, the online electronic reporting system provides drop-down menus that can help those individuals identify the exact agency where the executive branch official is employed. Now, let's talk about who is an executive branch lobbyist. You'll note that there is no two-part definition in terms of lobbying in the executive branch. The definition does not mention principal duties. The Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act has a simple definition. Any person who acts in a representative capacity and makes an expenditure is an executive branch lobbyist. The Executive Branch Lobbyist Disclosure Act, unlike the Legislative Lobbyist Disclosure Act, is tied 100% to a person making an expenditure. If a person acts in a representative capacity, engages in lobbying, but never makes an expenditure, then that person will never have to register with the Ethics Board as an executive branch lobbyist. Now that we have defined who executive branch lobbyists and legislative lobbyists are, let's discuss the responsibilities of those lobbyists in the state of Louisiana. The responsibilities are the same whether a person is classified as a legislative lobbyist or as an executive branch lobbyist. The first thing that a person must do is register with the Louisiana Board of Ethics as soon as possible, but no later than 5 days after his employment as a lobbyist or after the first action which requires his registration. The registration fee is $110 for each branch the lobbyist registers. The registration fee may be paid online using a credit card, or if the lobbyist chooses, he may mail or hand deliver a check to the Board of Ethics office. If the lobbyist chooses to pay by check, his registration is not completed until the payment is received. In the case of legislative lobbyists, if lobbying isn't part of a person's principal duties, then that person would not be required to register as soon as he or she is employed. However, if an expenditure is made in a representative capacity, that would be an action which requires their registration. Likewise, an executive branch lobbyist would only be required to register within 5 days of making his first expenditure. Filing supplemental registrations are another responsibility. Once a person registers using the electronic filing system, a record is kept of all changes made and reports filed. Within 10 days of a lobbyist's termination of his employment or representation of a client, he is required to go online and update his lobbying registration to provide the date he terminated his relationship with that client or employer. In addition, as soon as possible, or within 5 days at the latest, if the lobbyist adds a representative or makes any other changes, such as contact information, he is required to supplement his registration information. Finally, lobbyists are responsible for filing monthly expenditure reports. The reports are due by the 25th of each month, disclosing expenditures made in the prior month in which the lobbyist was registered. For example, if you are a registered lobbyist in the month of January, then you are required by the 25th of February to file a report which discloses all expenditures made during January. Now that we know what the responsibilities of a lobbyist are, let's talk about the penalties for noncompliance with the statute. This is important because the late fees are assessed for each registration, supplemental report, and expenditure report that is not timely filed.
The Lobbyist Disclosure Act states that for each business day, a report is late, a fee of $50 per day up to a maximum of $500 per report shall be assessed against the lobbyist.
The fine is automatic. A lobbyist can request a waiver of that penalty by submitting in writing a good cause waiver request. If the Ethics Board deems that there is good cause for the late filing, they have the authority and the ability to waive that fine or to suspend a portion of that fine conditional on the lobbyist's future compliance with the Disclosure Acts. Penalties can also be imposed for a lobbyist's failure to accurately file reports.
Please take note that there is an additional penalty of up to $1,000 for filing a report more than 11 business days late. The statute indicates that a lobbyist who files a report 11 or more business days late may be assessed an additional penalty of up to $1,000 in addition to the statutory late fees that are automatically assessed. If you're going to file a report late, make sure you don't file it more than 11 business days late. There are some additional penalties for non-compliance in the statute, which includes censure and prohibiting one from lobbying.
Now that we've gone over the definitions in both the legislative and executive branch lobbyist disclosure acts, we've discussed the responsibilities of a person who is classified as a lobbyist, and we've gone over the penalties for noncompliance with the statutes. We are going to pause for a moment and ask you a series of brief questions. These questions are designed to gauge your understanding of the definitions and the responsibilities of a lobbyist. Question 1. Shay is a secretary at Lannister & Sons, a production company. She is instructed by her employer to call a legislator and inform him that the production company would appreciate his vote on a bill. Shay has never done this before and probably will not in the future. Must Shay register as a lobbyist? A. No. B. Yes.